The first knock didn't come from the HOA. It came from the police. And that's how I knew this wasn't going to be a normal neighborhood dispute. I was alone on my land, midway through restoring a car that hadn't run since my grandfather was alive, when the sound of tires grinding over gravel cut through the quiet. Not a delivery truck. Not a neighbor. Something heavier. Slower. Intentional. I looked up. Black and white cruiser. Lights off. Parked right where my fence line used to be. That's when the pit formed in my stomach. Because this wasn't the first time the HOA had checked in. But it was the first time they brought badges. I wiped my hands, walked out into the sun, and watched two officers step out like they already knew the script. One of them didn't even look at me at first, just scanned the land. The trees. The workshop. The open space. That look? That was the look of someone sent with expectations. "Sir," the older one finally said, notebook already open. "Are you the property owner?" Not my name. Not a greeting. Not a question that assumed innocence. Just ownership. I said yes. And that's when he told me they'd received a complaint. Unpermitted structures. Unsafe modifications. Possible zoning violations. All from a homeowners association I had never agreed to join. Here's the part that still makes my blood boil. I inherited this land 10 years ago. Not a house. Not a plot. Land. Hundreds of acres that had been in my family longer than the HOA president had been alive. Back then, it was just trees, dirt roads, and silence. No gates. No manicured lawns. No newsletters threatening fines in bold red letters. Then development came. Luxury homes. Stone entry signs. An HOA with standards. And suddenly, my land was a problem. At first, it was letters. Then emails. Then certified mail. Requests turned into warnings. Warnings turned into violations. And now? Police. The officer flipped a page and said something that made my chest tighten. "This association claims your property falls within their jurisdiction." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny. Because it was insane. I told him the truth. I'd never signed anything. Never attended a meeting. Never paid a dime. My deed was clean. My taxes were paid. My boundaries were surveyed. The younger officer shifted his weight. Uncomfortable. The older one didn't. He asked if he could take a look around. That's when I realized what was happening. This wasn't about safety. It wasn't about permit. It wasn't about compliance. This was pressure. Because my land, once ignored, was now worth over $10 million. And the HOA wanted control. Or access. Or leverage. And they were willing to use uniforms to get it. As the officer stepped past my fence line without waiting for permission, something snapped inside me. Because if this was their opening move, I needed to decide how this story was going to end. The moment his boot crossed my property line, I knew this wasn't a courtesy visit anymore. It was a test. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't block him. I just watched, quietly, as the officer walked toward my workshop like he already expected to find something wrong. That's the thing about HOA complaints. They're never about what is wrong. They're about what might be wrong if someone looks hard enough. The younger cop stayed back with me. He kept glancing between his partner and my land like he wished he were anywhere else. That told me everything. "Who filed the complaint?" I asked. He hesitated. Just long enough. The Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. There it was. The same HOA that had been mailing me letters with phrases like community standards and visual harmony. The same HOA whose president once told me, smiling, that my land was holding back neighborhood value. Funny how that works. I asked the obvious question. The one that should have ended the conversation. How can an HOA I never joined send police onto private land? The older officer finally stopped walking. He turned around slowly, pen tapping against his notebook. "They claim historical inclusion," he said. That phrase hit me harder than any accusation. Historical inclusion. Translation? They were trying to rewrite the past. I told him my family bought this land decades before Pine Ridge Estates existed. Before their gates, before their bylaws, before their golf carts and lawn rules and monthly dues. He didn't argue. Instead, he said something worse. "Sir, I'm just here to document." That's when I realized the real danger wasn't today. It was the paper trail. Because once something gets documented, it stops being a misunderstanding and starts becoming a case. And HOAs thrive on cases, on slow pressure, on attrition. The officer started taking photos. My workshop, the car, the outbuildings. Each click felt like another inch of ground being taken without permission. I told him, calmly, that I did not consent to searches or photograph, that this was private property, that if the HOA believed there was a legal issue, they could address it through proper channels. He nodded. Then he took another photo anyway. That's when I stepped forward. Not aggressive, not loud, just firm. "I'm asking you to leave." The younger officer cleared his throat. The older one finally looked at me, not like a homeowner, but like an obstacle. "Sir," he said, "if this escalates, it won't be simple." That was supposed to scare me. Instead, it clarified everything. Because now I understood the game. The HOA wasn't trying to enforce rules. They were trying to provoke mistakes, get reactions, create leverage, maybe force a sale, maybe pressure an easement, maybe make life so uncomfortable that I'd cave. And sending police? That was intimidation wrapped in legality. I told him something I'd been holding back since the first letter arrived. "I have an attorney." That made him pause. I added, "And any further contact from the HOA goes through them." Silence. Then the older officer closed his notebook. They left without another word. But as the cruiser rolled away, I noticed something I hadn't before. A man standing near the HOA fence line across the road. Phone out. Recording. Watching. Reporting back. That night I didn't sleep. Because I knew this wasn't over. Not even close. The HOA had tested my boundaries. And next time, they wouldn't send police. They'd send paperwork. And paperwork is where people lose land without ever hearing a knock. The letter arrived 3 days later. Certified. Thick. Official looking enough to make your pulse spike before you even open it. That's the HOA's favorite weapon. Because fear does half the work for them. I stood at my kitchen counter, envelope untouched, staring at my name printed in bold like an accusation. I already knew what was inside. After the police visit, this was inevitable. Still, when I broke the seal, my jaw tightened. Notice of violation. Multiple pages. Highlighted sections. Deadlines in red. They claimed my workshop violated community aesthetic standard. That my land use was inconsistent with residential harmony. That my structures were erected without approval from the Pine Ridge Estates Architectural Review Committee. I actually laughed. Out loud. Because the workshop had been there before Pine Ridge Estates had a name. Before their sign. Before their bylaws were a rough draft on someone's laptop. But the laughter faded fast. Page 4 is where it turned ugly. They cited fines. Daily fines. Escalating fines. Then came the line that made my stomach drop. Failure to comply may result in legal action, liens, or forced remediation. Forced. That's HOA language for we'll do it ourselves and bill you. I called my attorney immediately. He didn't sound surprised. That worried me. After I emailed him photos of my deed, surveys, and the letter, there was a long pause on the line. Then he said something I wasn't ready for. "They're not bluffing." Apparently, Pine Ridge Estates had been expanding quietly for years, absorbing adjacent parcels, pressuring elderly landowners, offering generous buyouts, followed by aggressive enforcement when refused. I wasn't the first problem property. I was just the biggest. 10 years ago, this land was overlooked. Now it was prime. And the HOA wanted it cleaned, controlled, or carved up. My attorney told me the truth most people never hear until it's too late. HOAs don't need to be right. They just need you tired. Every letter, every fine, every visit. It's a war of patience. That's when I made a decision that changed everything. I stopped reacting. No angry emails. No phone calls. No confrontations at the fence line. Instead, I documented everything. Date, times, photos of officers on my land, copies of every letter. And while the HOA was busy stacking paper, I was digging into history. Old plats, county records, archived zoning map. And that's when I found it. A clause buried in a decades-old county filing that made my heart race. A boundary exclusion. My land wasn't just older than the HOA. It was legally protected from being included in any future association without my explicit consent. Not implied. Not assumed. Explicit. I forwarded everything to my attorney. His reply came fast. This changes the balance. But before we could respond formally, the HOA made another move. This one wasn't a letter. It was physical. I woke up one morning to the sound of machinery. Bulldozers. At the edge of my land. Right where the HOA's property ended. They were clearing trees. My trees. I drove down the dirt road, heart pounding, and saw it, an orange line of survey flags marching straight toward my boundary. A man in a reflective vest told me they were preparing for community access improvements. Access. Through my land. Without permission. Without notice. Without consent. That's when I realized this wasn't harassment anymore. It was an invasion. And if I didn't stop it right then, I might lose more than peace. I might lose ground. I parked my truck sideways across the dirt road. Not aggressively. Deliberately. The bulldozer idled 20 yards away, its engine rumbling like a warning. The operator killed the motor and looked at me like I'd just ruined his day. Maybe I had. I stepped out, phone already recording. Who authorized this? I asked. The man in the vest didn't hesitate. That's what scared me. Pine Ridge Estates, HOA. Of course. I told him they were on private property. That they had crossed a surveyed boundary. That any further movement would be trespassing. He shrugged. They said it was cleared. Cleared. By who? Certainly not me. I called my attorney on speaker. Loud enough for everyone to hear. When he introduced himself and asked for the name of the contractor, the mood shifted fast. Hard hats turned. Radios crackled. People suddenly remembered appointments elsewhere. Within minutes, the machinery shut down. But the damage was already done. Trees gone. Earth torn up. A visible scar carved into land my family had protected for generations. That's when the HOA president showed up. Not in work boots. Not in safety gear. In a pressed polo and sunglasses. He smiled like this was a misunderstanding. Good morning, he said. Let's not make this bigger than it needs to be. That sentence is HOA code. It means submit quietly. I told him, on camera, that his association had no authority here. That they were violating county law. That every inch of damage was being documented. His smile didn't fade. Instead, he said something that made my stomach turn. Property lines change all the time. That was it. No apology. No denial. Just entitlement. He believed that if they pushed hard enough, long enough, reality would bend. That paperwork and pressure could rewrite ownership. I sent the footage to my attorney. Then he gave me instructions I never expected. Let them escalate. That sounded insane. But he explained. The HOA had crossed a line, literally and legally. Trespass. Destruction of property. Attempted easement creation without consent. If they backed off now, they'd spin it as a misunderstanding. If they doubled down, they'd expose themselves. So I waited. And they did exactly what he predicted. The next week, I received another letter. This one wasn't about aesthetics. It was about access rights. They claimed long-term community use of a path that had never existed. Claimed precedent. Claimed necessity. They wanted a permanent access road through my land. For emergency services. That phrase is dangerous. Because once it sticks, it's hard to undo. I declined. Formally. Through my attorney. 2 days later, the police came back. Different officers this time. Different tone. They said the HOA reported obstruction of emergency planning. I asked if there was a warrant. There wasn't. I asked if there was a court order. There wasn't. I told them they were being used. One officer sighed and said quietly, "We get a lot of these." That's when it hit me. This HOA wasn't just aggressive. They were experienced. They'd done this before. Probably one before. But this time, they'd chosen the wrong landowner. Because while they were relying on intimidation and confusion, I was about to force everything into the one place they hate most: open court. And once this went public, they wouldn't be able to hide behind letters and uniforms anymore. The lawsuit hit them harder than I expected. Not because it was dramatic, but because it was precise. Trespass, property damage, harassment, attempted unlawful easement. Every claim backed by photos, video, county records, and their own letters. The same paper trail they thought would bury me was now lined up against them. And here's the part HOAs never plan for: discovery. Suddenly, they weren't in control of the narrative anymore. They had to turn over emails, meeting minutes, internal messages, everything. That's when the cracks turned into fractures. Buried in an email thread labeled "Expansion Opportunities" was a message from the HOA president himself. He called my land a choke point. Said it was inevitable I'd come around. Suggested that pressure would speed things up. Pressure. That word showed up a lot. Pressure through enforcement. Pressure through fines. Pressure through authorities. Seeing it in writing made my hands shake. Not with fear, but anger. Because this wasn't about community. It was about acquisition. When the documents went to my attorney, his tone changed completely. They're in trouble. The HOA panicked. I know this because the tone of their communication shifted overnight. No more threats. No more deadlines. Just requests to discuss resolution. They offered to pay for the damaged trees. Offered to clarify boundaries. Offered to drop all violations if I'd consider a mutually beneficial agreement. Translation? They wanted an easement. Phil. Even after everything. I said no. And that's when they made their biggest mistake. They held an HOA meeting. And forgot that meetings create records. A neighbor forwarded me the agenda. My name was on it. Underlined. They discussed my property like it was already theirs. Talked about future access. Talked about how, once legal issues are resolved, development could proceed. Resolve. As if my rights were a speed bump. We subpoenaed the recording. When the judge heard it, everything changed. He didn't raise his voice. Didn't scold. He asked one question. Why did the HOA believe it had authority over land explicitly excluded from its jurisdiction? No one had a good answer. The room went quiet. The HOA's attorney tried to argue ambiguity. The judge shut that down fast. He called their actions aggressive, overreaching, and deeply concerning. Then he issued a temporary injunction. No contact, no enforcement, no access. They weren't even allowed to send me letters anymore. But the real blow came next. He ordered a full review of the HOA's expansion practices. County level, public, and just like that, the power dynamic flipped. The same association that sent police to intimidate me was now under investigation. Neighbors started talking. Former owners came forward. Stories surfaced. It wasn't just me. I was just the one who didn't back down. As I walked out of the courthouse, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Relief. But also a question. Because when organizations like this lose quietly, they don't always stop. Sometimes they wait. And sometimes, they retaliate. End of part 5. Continue? Yes or no? The retaliation didn't come as a letter. It came as silence. No fines. No emails. No surprise visits. For weeks. That's when you know something's coming. Because HOAs don't just let go, they regroup. Neighbors started stopping by my fence line. Not hostile. Curious. Whispering stories like confessions. One man told me his parents had been fined into selling. Another said the HOA threatened liens over a shed that had been there since the 90s. The pattern was clear now. Pressure. Isolation. Exhaustion. And when that failed, delay. Then, one morning, I got a call from my attorney. They're dissolving. I thought I misheard him. The county review uncovered enough violations: improper expansions, misuse of enforcement funds, abuse of authority, that Pine Ridge Estates HOA was being forced into restructuring. The board resigned. The president vanished from the paperwork overnight. But here's the twist. Before dissolving, they tried one last move. They filed a claim. Not against me. Against themselves. An internal resolution attempting to retroactively legitimize past enforcement actions. It was a legal Hail Mary. And it failed instantly. The county rejected it. The judge dismissed it. The record now showed something permanent. They had acted without authority. Which meant every action they'd taken against me. Invalid. I didn't just win. I cleared the land's name. The injunction became permanent. The HOA was barred from ever asserting jurisdiction over my property again. That exclusion clause I'd found? It was now reinforced by court order. $10 million worth of land. Untouchable. The neighbors benefited too. With the HOA gone, fines stopped. Pressure eased. People started breathing again. A few weeks later, I walked the scarred edge of my property where the bulldozers had stopped. New saplings were already planted. Life reclaiming what was taken. That's when I realized something. If I'd panicked during that first police visit, if I'd argued emotionally, if I'd tried to work it out informally, I would have lost. Not because I was wrong, but because I would have been worn down. HOAs count on people folding quietly. This time they miscalculated. Because I wasn't just protecting land. I was protecting a boundary they never had the right to cross. And as I stood there, phone buzzing with messages from neighbors thanking me, I thought the story was over. I was wrong. Because one final envelope was waiting in my mailbox. From the county. Stamped final notice. And what it contained would make this ending even more unexpected. The envelope wasn't threatening. That's what made it terrifying. No red ink. No bold warnings. Just clean county letterhead and a tone so calm it felt surgical. I opened it slowly. Inside was a formal notice confirming the conclusion of the review into Pine Ridge Estates HOA. Pages of legal language boiled down to one sentence that stopped me cold. My land was being formally recognized as a protected historical holding. Not just excluded from HOA authority. Protected. Because during the investigation, county officials uncovered something no one, including me, had fully realized. My grandfather hadn't just owned this land. He'd preserved it. Decades ago, he'd signed a conservation-adjacent agreement tied to water rights and land stewardship. It had been dormant, forgotten, buried under newer filings, until the HOA forced someone to look. That designation meant my land couldn't be absorbed, rezoned, or accessed by any private association. Ever. Without state-level approval. The same pressure campaign meant to corner me had locked the land away permanently. $10 million in market value. 0% HOA control. The county apologized, formally, for the police involvement. They clarified that future complaints from any association regarding my property would be flagged automatically. In other words, the harassment pipeline was shut off. A week later, I got one last call. A former HOA board member. Voice low. Defeated. He didn't threaten. He didn't argue. He asked if I planned to sell. I told him no. There was a long silence before he said, "Figures." That's when I finally understood the full picture. They never wanted compliance. They wanted acquisition. They wanted my land to finish their map. But some maps have edges. And some lines can't be moved, no matter how many letters you send or cops you call. Today the workshop is quieter. The car's almost done. The land is still mine, unbroken, unpaved, and finally respected. And every time I hear gravel crunch under tires now, I don't tense up, because I know the difference between authority and bluff. If you're dealing with an HOA that's pushing, pressuring, or crossing lines, remember this. You don't have to be louder. You have to be prepared. Because when bullies realize they've picked the wrong target, they don't escalate, they disappear.